Good morning, everyone, and thanks for coming along this morning. Despite this youthful exterior, I have been in the industry for more than 20 years, and in fact my first proper job was with Wood Group, Foster Wheeler Wood Group, joint venture, which is a design engineering house, and then became part of Wood Group Engineering. And I remember in my 8.5 years of recruiting graduates, apprentices for the drawing office, lots and lots of day rate contractors, that there always seemed to be this churn and this merry-go-round of people moving. And it's always been a bit of a conundrum for me as to, when we can manage directional drilling and all these fantastic challenges, we haven't managed to crack this yet. But it certainly feels very different at the moment. Certainly the issue feels more acute, but there's also much more energy around collaborating to find solutions, which I find really exciting. So, as Robert said, today we're launching our 7th demographics report. That covers the offshore population only, and it uses hard data which comes from the Vantage POB system, so it doesn't rely on survey responses. The report itself will be found on our website from midnight tonight. So I'm just going to pick out some of the highlights and then talk a little bit about an update of what we're doing as an industry around the skills issues. We're going to look a little bit at the demographics of the offshore population, where they go, and what trends can we see by looking at historical data. And then, as I say, we'll have a look at the wider agenda. I'd also like to say thank you to my colleagues in Oil and Gas UK who have done a huge amount of work on this report, especially Moira Lamb. In this slide, we can see that the total number of workers travelling offshore continues to increase. And last year, this is last year's data, almost 57,000, the highest figure since we started collating this in 2006. And it's almost a 9% increase in the year before. Last year we saw an increase in numbers in all age brackets, which was good, including in particular almost 14% increase in workers under 30, which is very encouraging. The average age of the offshore worker is 41 years, 41.1 years, and that has stayed pretty constant in the 7 years that we've been producing this report, where it's always been between 40 and 41. Not so good is the number of women in the offshore workforce. That is still only 3.75% of the total. That's an increase of only 0.05% in the previous year. And of that figure of just over 2,000, 750 are core workers, and we define those for the purposes of this report as those who are offshore for more than 100 nights. That core workforce of more than 100 nights also increased, and that was by 8.4%. But interestingly, the proportion of the total remains the same, so they still make up about 45% of the total. If you're interested, the full report breaks down the number of nights offshore, and we can see that 18% almost of the total figure, that's about 10,000 people, actually spent less than 10 nights offshore. This is a new piece of analysis we've just done. This is the 2nd year, and this shows the age distribution. The solid graph is the latest figure, and the blue line is 2010, and the orange line 2011 report figures. And this is really helpful, I think, in tackling the folklore around an ageing population, which is one of the reasons why we look at this report. We see a normal distribution, other than a spike, between the ages of 23 to 35, which is where we would probably want it to see. And we're not seeing a huge shift to the right, which is very encouraging. Now, we have to acknowledge that these are overall figures, and so individual installations or employers may have different stories. And this is where our offshore population lives. No surprise, throughout the UK, and the size of the triangle indicates the density. And this helps us to tell a powerful story when we're trying to raise the profile of the industry. It's not just an Aberdeen or off of Aberdeen issue. They're quite a diverse bunch. This slide looks at workforce nationality. And as we'd expect, by far the majority are British, that's 83%. But of the remaining 17%, the largest groups, perhaps not surprisingly, are Norwegian and Dutch. And for those interested in such factoids, Malta dropped out of the top 10 last year, but Denmark was a new entry. So if we've looked at where they come from, where do they go? This shows us where the offshore population is based in terms of sector, and you can see that by far the biggest is Central North Sea, which is just over 43% of the population, followed by the Northern North Sea. And this map is in the full report with a breakdown by gender, which is also quite interesting. We've started looking for trends now that we have a few years of data, and last year for the first time we plotted the core workforce against the oil price. And the black line on the top is the core workforce, and obviously the oil price, the purple line below. And if we look at that, we can see that there is a time lag, not just in the core workforce, but in the total workforce. And the shape of the line follows with a time lag of 1 year. The red dotted line is a mathematical projection based on our 7 years data. And what we can see is that the actual number is already ahead of that projection. But next year should be particularly interesting, because if the correlation between numbers and the oil price holds true, we'd expect to see the numbers plateau. So next year we should have a better understanding of the veracity of that apparent correlation. The next slide probably echoes some of the comments that Dave has made. And you can see the growing gap between the size of the core workforce and production, the red line being production. Now in our activity survey, we've covered reasons for the production decline, and Dave's mentioned some of them in terms of production efficiency and ageing assets, the slowdown in investment in 2008 and 9, and unplanned shutdowns as well as increased planned shutdowns. The increased personnel will be partly to do with obviously the asset integrity work, but also there's an increased investment in new developments and improvements to existing facilities which are not yet being reflected in production figures. But it's quite a hard-hitting slide, I think, that one. The vertical lines show what's happened after the publication of KP3 report and then the Macondo incident. The full report also looks at other comparisons, including core workforce numbers against drilling activity, against overall expenditure, and compares numbers with OPEX and CAPEX. So as I say, you can find all of that in the slide. A little bit of good news. This is quite an interesting graph, and it shows the change in age distribution since we started producing this report. The yellow or orange bars show the figures from 2006 to 2011, and you can see that we actually had a reduction, a loss in a kind of critical area, our mid-career 35 to 49 age group, which is disconcerting, but is also reflected actually as the prime gaps onshore. Our figures from last year give us a little bit of good news in that that decline has been reversed, and we've seen the numbers actually grow in that area, though no room for complacency, because as you can see, they've grown in much smaller numbers, and we'll continue to monitor that. What the demographic survey gives us is a snapshot of the population as it is now, and it is quite useful for monitoring, as we say, the age profile, the diversity, etc. But we need to remember that that's only about 10% of the population in the industry, and that itself is one of the key messages we need to get out when we're trying to raise perception and awareness. What we do need is a really full picture and a robust picture of the total industry as it is now, and the forecasts for the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years ahead, which will enable us to better tailor solutions and produce the right training packages. So you will have seen the publicity yesterday regarding the launch of an industry-wide labour market intelligence survey. So this is going to be a really comprehensive piece of work which APITO are project managing on the industry's behalf, and the steering group had its first meeting yesterday, so there's a lot of steering group activity going on, it seems. But APITO pulled together a number of trade associations, and we're looking to develop what will become the industry authoritative version of truth, if you like, because at the moment we're a bit at the mercy of the latest survey from a recruitment consultant or one of the big four, or a media report, and it's very difficult to challenge those without really robust data. It was also highlighted as one of the important priorities at the Oil and Gas UK Skills Summit, which we held last year. So that's going to be a key piece of work going forward. We know that we need, as an industry, to find smarter solutions. That's smarter solutions to training. So at the moment, Scottish Enterprise are facilitating and supporting a feasibility study into what's called an approving centre, which will look, it's a proposal, a suggestion from the OCA, and again, that's got a number of industry representatives on the steering group, and that's to look at how can we bring already skilled personnel in from other sectors to and get them ready for offshore work more quickly, so they're more familiar with an offshore environment, and reduce the pressure on beds, and reduce the level of fallout of people who find that offshore work isn't for them. So that's another interesting development that's being actively worked at the moment. We're looking at discipline work groups to address the areas of shortages onshore, which is design engineering in all disciplines, subsea, drilling, heavyweight project management, geoscience. And what can we do? Is it feasible to develop transition training? What does that look like? Can we perhaps accelerate some of the people who are in the drawing office, say? Though, of course, nobody draws anymore, but can they accelerate their development because their positions might be easier to backfill? We don't have the answers yet, but these are all things that we want to look at and see what levers we can pull. Major companies like Wood Group and the operators have the resources in-house to develop a number of solutions for themselves, but I'm really pleased to say that they're still very supportive of industry-wide initiatives. And we really believe that if we can work together, it will increase participation, because retraining facility possibilities will open up for small and medium companies. For example, we'll investigate things like perhaps umbrella graduate and apprenticeship schemes. So if an organisation can't provide a complete training package because they don't have the full suite of work that's required to get to chartered status, for example, are there ways we can move people around the industry and allow, as I say, greater participation from our membership companies? We're very pleased, as Robert said, to have our colleagues from the military here today. We're really kind of upping our game in terms of military recruitment, and a number of companies have been doing that very successfully, as you will have seen in the media. I remember when I had my first job, as I say, at Wood Group, we recruited a number of people from the Air Force. Sorry for the other services to mention that. But it was tremendous success. So it is something that's been going on for some time. But if we do that collaboratively, we can do it on a bigger scale and we can do it more proactively. So what we're doing at the moment is getting to a position where we will have advance notice of the skills that are coming free from the military. And there are 18 to 20,000 leavers each year, which is a huge potential pool for us to tap into. At the moment, APITO are leading for the industry on a skills mapping exercise. You could also call it a translation exercise, if you like. So we're taking the jargon out of oil industry jobs and mapping the skills and competencies required. And we've got resources from the military who are doing the same for military personnel. So there's much easier cross-matching of personnel in the future. So that's work that's underway and is really important. And that will help us identify the gaps for people who are coming out of the armed services, and with economies of scale develop more transition and conversion programs. And we want to replicate that in other sectors. So I was pleased to hear the Minister mention coal today, because we have been looking to reach out to the coal sector north and south of the border who are having their challenges. Education is really important, and we need to get the balance right. And because we know, for example, from the industry apprenticeship scheme, which APITO and the ECITB run on our behalf, that we don't have a problem attracting young people to the industry. We've had 3,500 applications this year for about 100 places. Our members tell us that their graduate schemes remain oversubscribed. So we're doing something right, but we can't be complacent. And we need to make sure that pipeline of young people continues to flow, not just for us, but for the economy as a whole. In March this year, we held a joint education summit with APITO, which had almost 100 people attending, including education representatives from across Scotland. And we agreed that as an industry, we would pool the resources, because there's a huge amount of work that's been done by both individual companies and APITO in this area. And if we could pool all of the workshops and resources that have been made available, we can reach far more schools and a wider geography more often and with a more consistent message. And that's really important, because it's not enough to kind of parachute in and do a fantastic event and then not revisit them for a couple of years. So that's another piece of work ongoing. So I hope that I've just touched the surface. You'll see that there's a lot going on, but we've got a huge amount to do. And I'd like to pick up some of the things that Dave has said. Certainly, as I've said, collaboration offers huge opportunities, particularly for greater participation throughout the supply chain. And that's only going to be helpful in terms of tackling the challenges, some of which are, I suppose, cultural or behavioural, if you like, as well as structural in the labour market. You know, we're competing globally as well as locally. Western Australia, we're told, are looking for 400,000 engineering personnel by 2020, 30,000 in New Zealand by 2015. We're competing with nuclear new build, nuclear decommissioning, renewables, shale. There are behaviours, as Dave has mentioned, around contract models, both in terms of employment models and the way contracts are written between clients and contractors. There is still, despite all our efforts, resistance to taking people who have proven skills but don't have any oil and gas experience on their CVs. I was speaking at the conference side of a careers exhibition here just a couple of weeks ago, and in the audience, when we had a panel session at the end, there were a number of people who had been seeking jobs, and the frustration was really clear. They said, you know, we've been round all of the exhibitors here today, and they want people with experience, but how can we get in there? And I'm sure, as employers, you hear these very sad stories every day, and that's something that's not an easy fix, and we need to work on together. And some of the things that Wood Group are doing are a really good example of that. This whole thing, as the Minister says, you know, there's not one solution, it's not one problem. Someone once described it to me as a plate of spaghetti, but we do need, I think, a holistic approach. I really welcome the Minister's commitment to simplifying the landscape, because that is a problem for us. And I do thank him for the very constructive engagement we've had over the past few months in developing the initiatives around Energy Skills Scotland and the Oil and Gas Academy. And I look forward to that continued engagement going forward, because it's really very, very helpful. I'd just like to finish by saying, you know, this isn't a training issue. It's not even an HR issue. I'd say it's not even an operations issue. It's a bottom line issue, and it is really important to the survival of the industry. As costs continue to grow, and labour costs, you know, form a part of that in an already expensive base, and as Dave says, it's going to have a real impact. And only by working together and thinking differently can we make a huge difference. But this is a real can-do industry. It's shown innovation and flexibility throughout its long history so far, and that's why we're still here. And so, like Dave, I recognise this is, as things go, this is not a bad problem to have, and look forward to working with you all on the challenges ahead. Thank you.